Well, at least 17 people have been reported killed in the Democratic Republic of Congo as rebel forces assault the eastern city of Goma. The UN says troops from the M23 rebel group and soldiers from neighbouring Rwanda have entered the city. The rebels claim to have captured the city, though the Congolese government disputes this. Thousands of civilians have fled across the border into Rwanda. Goma is home to around 2 million people, including many already displaced by the conflict. I'm joined now by DW's Jonas Gerding, who's in the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kinshasa. Do we have a clearer picture yet of what exactly the rebels' goals are?
So officially, the rebels, they claim that they are protecting the rights of the Tutsi minority in the DRC, and we need to remember that this is the group which has been victim of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. And this is also where Rwanda comes in, the neighboring country, which is supporting the rebels. So they are backing the rebels, but they don't officially recognize this. And so this is when we talk about Rwanda, but for some this is rather a pretext, and they say it's also about minerals, it's about the broader economic and political interests. And to make things even more complex, some rebel figures and some political figures have joined the rebellion, and they say they even want to overthrow the government in Kinshasa.
So the Rwandan role here is a big one, but why wasn't the Congolese army and the UN peacekeepers prepared for an attack of this scale, given that M23 is not a new group? They've been in this scenario before.
One answer is the strength of the M23 rebels. They are supported, they are backed by Rwanda. There are around 3,000 to 4,000 troops on the ground. This is what UN documents say. Then it's the weakness of the Congolese army. People are not well trained, they are not well paid, and they've got several loyalty issues. And then we need to look at the situation. So how the situation looks like in Goma. We have the Rwandan border to the east. We've got the Lake Kivu to the south, to the west, and to the north. There are the rebel positions, and so the population is actually taken hostage. And this means that all fighting has a huge risk of collateral damage, and this needs to be taken into account. And if you're talking about the United Nations, they simply don't have a mandate to fight against such a strong, huge army like the one which is on the ground. Actually, they are there to protect civilians.
It's a pretty complex picture. Are there any countries in that wider region that could mediate in the conflict?
There are already the first mediation efforts which are done by Kenya, which is a member of the Eastern African community. But people in Kinshasa, in the DRC in general, they're a little bit skeptic because there has already been a peace process, a negotiation process, and this has largely failed. And there's another process, the Luanda process in Angola, which has also failed, and this was because the president Tshisekedi, he always said that he's not willing to talk to the rebels directly, but this was one of the conditions for Paul Kagame, Rwandan president, to attend. So I think the biggest leverage at this moment is actually in the international community. In 2012, 2013, there has already been a rebellion, and after sanctions, the rebels got out of the city.
DW's Jonas Gerding reporting from the capital of the DRC, Kinshasa. Thank you.
Earlier, I spoke with Mvemba Dizolele, director of the African program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I asked him about the goals of the rebels.
That is what the question everybody's asking. This is not the first time, of course, that the M23 has taken Goma. They did this in 2012, and then they had repercussion there. The SADC forces called FIB, composed of Tanzanian, Malawian, and South African, in conjunction with MONUSCO and the Congolese army, did kick them out. And so this is a recurrence of something that had happened before. The result of this action is typically death for innocent civilians. It's also displacement of millions of civilians who have already been displaced in IDP camps. And of course, there is costs that we cannot even measure in trauma and others. The question of what this operation is about remains a mystery to most people. It's really the absurdity of the engagement of this conflict.
Well, another question then is how much influence does Rwanda actually have on the rebels directly?
All the reports from credible institutions such as the United Nations, countries like the United States, and independent observer has pointed out to the support that Rwanda has gotten with these refugees and having been behind them. I was in Kigali back in October. Rwanda has said they're not behind them. They have pointed to Uganda and other sources. But everybody else, including the group of experts of the United Nations, has said that they are supported by Rwanda. The challenge is Rwanda has never taken responsibility for this kind of action. For the last 30 years, Rwanda has always denied engagement in this conflict. The result is it's very difficult to make peace if people are not saying that they're part of that. How do you make peace? We saw this, what will happen in Rwanda, in Angola, and Rwanda pulling out of that. So it remains to be seen. But what is clear is that the people of Goma deserve to live in peace. Whosoever is behind this, whether the Rwanda accept or not, whether it's the responsibility of not, it really undermines the credibility of the African Union, of the East Africa community, and of course of what we call the international community.
Well, that's actually an interesting point you bring up right there. So what could this conflict mean for the wider region?
For the wider region, this conflict means instability. We will remember, Aaron, that Burundi is involved in DRC because Burundi is there to fight rebels, the Red Tabara. Rwanda claims to be involved in DRC because they're fighting FDLR, which is a remnant of troops that had been involved in the genocide in 1994. And Kenya and other troops had shown up as part of the reaction force from the East Africa community. That operation ended in debacle and disaster for the population. It didn't deliver. So it's a question of mistrust between countries, between people, and between leaders in those communities. It will mean that instability will continue. It's also a question of what is driving the conflict. We cannot ignore the economic dimension of this conflict. The Kivus, both south and north, are rich in mineral resources that have been pillaged, really, and looted by other external forces that are not Congolese.
That was Mvemba, Phezo, Dizolele. Thank you very much for your analysis.
You're welcome, sir.